And all right, let's get started here. Thank you so much for joining us today for the session. We're excited to share with you not just the content, but a new format here. We've got Mike Chirokas, who's going to be joining us for a speed run session through this topic of quantifying the value of modern web development. So if you're building on the modern web today, whether you're using Netlify or another service, you've no doubt seen the benefits of in this new way of building and deploying sites with microservices architectures and APIs. That often that requires a case up to your business leaders. The shift, particularly if you're working on a large scale site, takes some resourcing, takes some time, takes some effort, and often those who are in the decision-making seat want to understand, what is this value going to be to my business? Is this going to be worth the investment of time and resources to make this shift? Will I get people who are trained in this new way? Will I be able to hire? So Mike's going to take you through that in a very short session today. Before we get started, let me start with a couple of housekeeping items. The session is being recorded, and so you'll be able to share this with your stakeholders or be able to watch it again. We will have time for Q&A, and so please do throughout the session feel free to put your questions in the Q&A. You can also use the chat to chat with your fellow attendees here, but of course, please respect the code of conduct. We have it listed there if you want to log on to jamstack.org. Lisa's got it in the chat session there. It basically just says be kind and don't post anything of spam and don't post anything negative. We really appreciate that. Just respect your fellow attendees. You are in listen-only mode, so chat or Q&A is the way that you can communicate. And again, please feel free to do so. I'm going to join you back at the end of the session for the Q&A. So I'm excited to see what questions this sparks for you. And with that, I'd love to welcome my colleague, Mike Chirokas, to the stage. He's going to take us through a about 10-minute session speed run on the value of modern web. Hi, Mike.
Hey, thanks so much, Samara. Yeah. So just a little bit of context for this 10 minutes, 10 slides. I'm a fairly fast person, and I have some running experience, although I did get cut from my college track team, but I have no speed running experience. So this may take a little bit more than 10 minutes, but I'm going to try and keep it to 10 minutes. But most of all, I want us to reach our objective for today, which is having you leave this session feeling confident, quantifying the value of modern web development with Netlify for your own business. So feeling confident, migrating to modern web, maybe from a monolith. It's a big change. I want you to feel confident that you're making the right decision, that there's data backing this up. For other decision makers, oftentimes folks love working in a decoupled Jamstack approach for personal projects or smaller sites. But bringing this to the enterprise is becoming more and more common. And oftentimes, when you talk to your CMO or CIO, CTO, having some stats to back this up, why this is the right decision is helpful in these conversations. And also clients, if you work at an agency, hopefully you never have to work on another Drupal 8 to 9 migration, 7 to 8, WordPress finicky plugins, basically wasting time that's not delivering value to your clients. And then if you want to share ROI stats with your friends and families, please feel free to do so. So very, very briefly, let's talk about what is modern web development. And to do so, let's contrast it with legacy monoliths where everything is kind of all in one. And so every single time a visitor comes to your site, it has to go through this and request information, it has to go through this long process before the HTML can be built and sent back to you. And this really results in two core issues. It's slow to develop new pages and sites, and the site stores and apps that you build end up being a lot slower for customers. When you move to a modern web architecture, where the front end is decoupled from the back end, and you're building and you're deploying as much as possible on the edge, there's two major benefits. There's a lot of benefits, but we're going to quantify two of them today. And one is faster development from these decoupled workflows, and the other is faster sites, stores, and apps. I'll show you what that means in terms of dollar figures too. And so quantifying the value of productivity and performance from the modern web development with Netlify. If you take away nothing from the rest of the session, this should give you kind of the spark notes, basically the summary. Productivity stats. So moving to modern web development with Netlify, it's 20 days faster to set up a new site, and you can save developers a day each week. Depending on how much you pay developers, it's a certain, you can quantify that based on time savings, right? So if you save a day a week, that's about a 20% efficiency for your developers. And I'll go through each of these stats in a little bit more detail and explain how we got to these numbers. It's supported by data and research from customers, Forrester, and also third parties. And then so from productivity improvements from modern web on Netlify, increased site visits by about 10% is what we've seen from clients, and then improved conversion rate by about 8%. We're starting to see that that's actually perhaps maybe an underestimate, but it's or conservative estimate. So I'll dig into each of these. One, how do you increase, how do you ship sites 20 days faster? And why is this important if you only launch one site? Well, what we found is most clients actually launch many sites, even if, say, you're a B2B company that has a B2B company that has an event, maybe multiple events, maybe you own a career site, you've got your marketing site, but also international versions. Think about Medallia.com. They've got 6 or 7 international sites as an example. So someone asked, where do we get the stats from? We'll share the research. This one right here, legacy without Netlify takes about 22 days. And this is from a client, a Fortune 100 client, who took a look at their process about how long does it take to take their site and go live for the very first time. And they ship about 50 sites a year. So it's a large scale business, but they did an in-depth analysis and they said this would take about 20 days. And when they do it with Netlify, it takes about 2 days. So that's because they no longer have to manage setting up dev servers, staging servers. Developers can work locally, CI/CD. They don't have to set that up. Environment variables are secured with Netlify. And also something interesting here is observability is very important for them. And so there's a portion of a few days that went into this calculation for them that was actually just setting up observability and hooking that into their Datadog database. And with Netlify, we have log drains that makes it a lot easier to do, to configure observability in less than a day rather than, I think they said it was 4 or 5 days combined. So 1, you can ship new sites 20 days faster. 2, it saves developers a day a week. So where do we get this data from? We talked to customers and we also combined it with some research from Forrester Consulting. You can read that research on our website. It's a Forrester Total Economic Impact Report. And so how do developers save a day a week? They can develop and collaborate faster on the modern web with Netlify, with instant and unlimited staging. If you worked on a WordPress monolith, sometimes a Sitecore monolith or something of the lines, it's working in the cloud environment can be restricting. You don't get to use all your VS Code or configurations that you usually want to use, and setting up a specific staging environment just to set up like a new one for a new developer might take a long time. And also something I wanted to call out was empowering anyone to publish. One of the pushbacks that we get sometimes is that WordPress is good for content creators, or Sitecore is good for content creators, or AEM in theory is good for content creators. But the reality is what we found is not having marketers have to create like designs for every single component actually speeds up development and takes time that developers are using to deploy content and pushes it onto the marketing team. And when I say pushes it, it's very efficient for the marketing team to just kind of click to deploy. So instead of what's on the right side of the screen, what you see, instead of seeing web developers there, it's content marketers deploying content straight from their, for example, contentful interface. I am a product marketing manager at Netlify, and I probably deploy on average 1 to 2 times a day on our websites, updating landing pages, creating new landing pages, creating forms like for webinars or something along the lines with Sanity. And also, so that was just on how the developers save about half a day on development. And then there's also the deployment. So you can eliminate time spent on DevOps. For example, one client said they were spending way too much time fine-tuning their AWS setup, and another client is saying sometimes we spend days upon days figuring out what broke in our CI/CD pipeline and then fixing it. And oftentimes this is front-end developers having to do DevOps work. I want to mention also another way to think about this is instead of just save a developers a day a week, oftentimes what we hear is teams will have 4 front-end developers, and then for their 5th developer, they're thinking about hiring someone just to focus on optimizing that pipeline and getting to market faster. And sometimes they can use a platform like Netlify to do that instead. So we've got get to market 20 days faster for new sites, save developers who use Netlify on the modern web a day a week, and then increase traffic by 10%. So how do we get to this number? Well, we know that Google rewards companies who have better page experience. One of the measures of page experience is Core Web Vitals. And so if you increase Core Web Vitals and say you've got your page versus another competitor's page, they have similar content, similar domain authorities, Google is going to start to rank your page higher than that. And think about how many pages you have on your site, right? The scales across all pages. And also mobile friendliness, HTTPS, et cetera. And this is a very specific example of where we saw this with a client. This was from the Forrester Total Economic Impact Report done by Forrester Consulting with a Netlify client who shifted from a site core monolith onto a decoupled web architecture using a modern JavaScript framework on Netlify. They increased mobile Lighthouse performance scores by 63 points, their desktop Lighthouse scores by 35 points. And it's a prettier chart, but that's a real chart of what their site traffic looked like. It increased by 10%. And then finally, improving conversion rate by 8%. I mentioned that this might be actually perhaps a very conservative estimate, but this is straight from very, very solid data from Google. Google and Deloitte used real user analytics and goal tracking and found that there was an 8.4% increase in conversion for every 100 milliseconds for retail sites. This was across 30 million sessions and 37 brands. And I spent way too much time digging into this to see how legit it was. And they threw out, I think it was like 20 brands or something along those lines because their analytics weren't clean enough. So this is super legit data. We've also seen plenty of cases where it's been more than this, than 8%. Pam Macmillan changed nothing about their site other than moving to decoupled web architecture with Netlify. They increased conversions by 25%. A little bit of an outlier, but Sennheiser just presented at the Netlify Headless Commerce Summit a week and a half ago, 2 weeks ago. Basically, they moved from a Shopify monolith to a composable commerce, decoupled modern web architecture with Netlify. They did it in 11 weeks, and they increased conversion by 137%. That wasn't just by making their site faster; it was also by tweaking a few, the design. And if you go to the site, it's an absolutely beautiful site. But they were able to achieve all of that because they moved to a modern web architecture, in addition to speed increases. And also, I wanted to mention what I haven't mentioned so far is reduce costs, right? So oftentimes we hear that Netlify halves bills or reduces costs because you're no longer managing dev servers, staging servers, all sorts of other services for varnish, caching, all that stuff that you have to do, that you have to like push into a monolithic website to try and get it to these speeds. You no longer need to pay for. Also, we know that about 40% of IT budgets are spent on just upgrades. So thinking about moving from a certain version of Sitecore to the next version, or AEM or something along those lines, or Drupal. If you work in an agency, you probably work with that frequently. That data comes from a commissioner report from the Mock Alliance, where they interviewed IT decision makers on the percentage of their budget spent on upgrades versus, and this is compared to like new feature development, customer facing features and functionality. And then finally, I kind of love this quote. This quote came from the Forrester Total Economic Impact Report, where Forrester interviewed a client of ours and said one of the problems that they had with their Sitecore monolith was that not only did you need a surgeon, but there's probably 5 or 6 in the whole world who maybe have that experience performing that surgery. And so what this meant was they were spending a lot of money for contract site core developers that could work on their very specific plugin stack, versus when they moved to a decoupled web architecture using a modern JavaScript framework with Netlify. They're able to hire pretty much any JavaScript developer. And as we know, there's a lot of JavaScript developers with a lot of really great experience out there. And they found that over 3 years, they saved about $993,000 just by being able to hire from a wider pool of candidates. So about $1 billion of savings there. And then finally, how do we get from a monolith? Is this going to be some massive project? And it doesn't have to be. Perfect example being the Sennheiser case that I just talked about. Very large company, tons of e-commerce. They have over 30 countries. They got the first few countries up in 11 weeks, and now they're scaling to the next 26 countries in 4 batches very quickly. So I hope that was around 10 minutes. It was certainly 10 slides. Maybe I went a little bit over, but I'm totally happy to answer some Q&A questions now.
Awesome. I just love the speed round session, Mike. It makes it like all the best information squeezed into just over 10 minutes. And it's so perfect for this day and age when everybody's very short on time. So I hope you appreciate that, audience. We do have some great questions in the Q&A. So I'm just going to tee these up for you, Mike. The number one question was, where do you get this data? What's the research that you compile to put all these numbers together?
Yeah, so it's from a variety of sources. I talked a little bit about every single one, I think, in this kind of speed run. But someone asked about a report. We actually did write an ebook, which has a lot of similar content, only it goes a level deeper and has citations for every single piece of data in there. Yeah, so I would point you there. I think what you heard was a lot of this came from the total economic impact report, customer research, and then, I mean, anytime you can get real user analytics, like the Google Deloitte research, we use that as well.
Great. Can definitely include those resources in the follow-up email to this session, and we'll send that out probably within the day. So you'll get those links to the Forrester TEI study, as well as the new ebook on accelerating digital growth with all these great citations. Thanks, Mike. Another question was about headless CMS. So it looks like in a couple of these examples, we were talking a little bit about Contentful was used in a couple of these examples. What other CMSs do we see in the ecosystem? Do we see being used, particularly for e-commerce? What do we see in the mix today?
Yeah, we tend to see a lot of Contentful. We also see Sanity. Netlify uses Sanity on our marketing site. That's what I use on a daily basis. We're seeing Storyblock come in a little bit more. Magnolia. Yeah, we see a wide variety of CMSs popping up. And then also, yeah, for e-commerce, the person didn't ask necessarily about, but it's usually pairing a CMS with an e-com platform that you can take headless. So oftentimes we'll see Contentful paired with Shopify, BigCommerce. I know we have a client, BigCommerce, paired with Sanity. Yeah.
Awesome. And you can go to the website again. We'll put this in the resources in the email, but on netlify.com, you'll find everything underneath enterprise, and then tech partners is where you'll find most of those integrations. Question around using Netlify to develop large scale business apps. So a lot of developers today are using Netlify, maybe even for their personal sites, maybe for a small project, but the question really is about large scale sites, which I'm pretty sure most of the content today was around developing and deploying these large scale sites where you're going to see quite a bit of the value. But can you talk about that a little bit more, Mike, in terms of the examples that we've got from customers using Netlify for large scale site deployment?
Yeah, 100%. We see that all the time. Yeah, I think it's it looks like this person's using Heroku so far. I would give it a go with Netlify, especially if you're using a monorepo. A lot of teams who have large scale sites have many sites, and sharing components maybe from Storybook across sites. They also usually have international sites. We have a whole webinar guide on how to architect for international sites. We see that a ton. It just makes it way more scalable to do it in a decoupled web architecture using Netlify for sure. Yeah, sharing deploy previews is something that I don't know if I dug into, but it's a really good way. If you have a very large site, and you actually have like a pretty sophisticated QA process, you can increase that QA time or decrease your QA time. I think Sennheiser said that they decreased their QA time using deploy previews before going live by like 60 or 40%.
Yeah.
And
large sites often means large teams, right? So that's where something like deploy preview comes into play. Lots of people looking and wanting to contribute to feedback.
Yeah, and the Git-based workflows, right? You can see every single change when you have a pull request. It's just way more scalable. Yeah.
Awesome. And a related question, Satyan is asking, he couldn't find a paid plan on the website other than some of our like pro, I guess I'm thinking he's referring to pro and business, which are paid, what we call self-service plans. Let's talk a little bit about Netlify Enterprise, shall we? And the key benefits of, and this relates to the last question about the scale, when you're building large scale sites at scale, going into one of the Netlify Enterprise plan packages, which includes HP Build, HP Edge.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, I think some of the main reasons we see teams go from like a pro plan into the enterprise plan is that they want to accelerate their websites. They want to make their websites even faster. And so the paid plan, the enterprise plan, is even faster than the pro or business plan because we have more nodes around the world. Another reason teams do it is uptime becomes a really big deal. Something I didn't talk about here, but the enterprise plan has a 99.99 SLA. Is another reason teams reach out to us. And if you're really thinking about quantifying the ROI of moving from a platform, if you know what your current uptime is, and you know how much every second of being uptime of being up, the value of that to your company, that's also something you can consider from a large company.
Yeah.
And yeah, you mentioned HP Build, right? So someone who recently conducted their own internal ROI on Netlify ended up they had the high performance edge, and they decided to actually get a high performance build because they found that if their developers were waiting, they had a very large site, and they had to build it pretty much the whole thing without on-demand builders. It was taking like 20 minutes or something like that. They're finding their developers were kind of like, that was kind of downtime productivity for developers. And by moving to HP Build, they could get more productivity out of their developers and save more money.
Amazing. So let me just make sure I'm clear. HP Build is all about the speed at which you can essentially build, and HP Edge is the speed at which the site's going to essentially render to the end user.
Yeah, thank you. That's a great summary.
I almost got it.
That was the speed run answer.
Speed run answer. I love it. And additionally, of course, when you get stuck, you might need some technical support, and that's included in our enterprise packages, as well as solutions engineering, which is a team that we don't talk about a lot, but you have access to solutions engineers who can help you with the stack, helping you architect. What do I need? What am I missing? If I'm going to get, plug in a search API, what do I need? Database, what's kind of the best API. So loads of more information on the Netlify Enterprise plan packages and what those include, above and beyond some of our self-service pricing packages on our site, of course. And yes, we will include that in the email. Okay, I got one more question for you, and then we'll wrap up. So we're going to keep this within 30 minutes, make it truly speed run. What are some of the common reasons why people aren't seeing the benefit today? Like, why is this something we actually have to spend 30 minutes to tell people about?
Yeah. Why they turn a blind eye to these benefits? I think quantifying productivity is really hard. It's once you make the switch, I think you realize how much of a pain it was. And a perfect example is frequently we'll see someone adopt Netlify when they move from a company, or adopt the modern web architecture with Netlify when they move from a company who had it to a company that doesn't have it. And the pain is obvious to them. But I think when you sit in when you've sat in a world where, you know, this is the process, how it works, you know, maybe we've made our varnish and our caching layer, like that process, a little bit more efficient. Like we've done all this work, but when you get to take a step back, you can realize how inefficient it is. And I think that's how teams have perhaps taken a blind have what was the word, had turned a blind eye to these benefits, is just like haven't taken a step back in a while and really thought about how they can do this much differently, much more efficiently.
And really what that means to the business or an organization, even if you're not a corporate, organization, the value of being able to deploy in the, what do we say, 2 days versus 22 days? Was it 2 days or 3 days?
Yeah, 2 days. Yeah.
It's a lot faster. What that actually means in terms of the benefits, whether you're corporate organization, commercial organization, or not. Well, Mike, thank you so much. This has been incredibly informative, and I hope that folks here will take this information to your stakeholders who are making decisions about the tools that you use. And when you want to use the tools that you do want to, this will help you make the case for continuing to be able to do that and to do that at scale. So thank you everyone for being here. We hope you enjoyed the session, and the resources email will be out pretty quickly, speedrun style. See you later.
Thank you. Thanks so much.